Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Legaltech Around the World series, which we are presenting the Centre for Legal Innovation at the College of Law in association and collaboration with In Council, and delighted to do so. It's been an amazing journey so far around the world, and we are very much looking forward to landing in Canada and the USA today and having a chat about what's happening there. As I have done with this series, I'm also very delighted to introduce your facilitator, David Bushby from In Council, and I'm going to fade away and come back kind of towards the end, after the end of this fabulous discussion. Thank you very much again, everyone, and over to you, David.
Thanks very much, Terry, and hello, everyone, and welcome to the 5th installment of the Legaltech Around the World series, brought to you, of course, by the College of Law Centre for Legal Innovation. As Terry mentioned, my name is David Bushby from Legaltech Consultancy and Lawyer Network In Council, and producer of the Law Hackers Weekly newsletter. I'm your host for this series. Joining us today, we've got 5 fabulous panelists leading the charge in the legal tech market in the USA and in Canada, for this being our 5th stop, like I said, on the Round the World tour that we've got happening this year in 2022. So with that said, I'd like to introduce each of our panelists. Firstly, we've got Wendy Butler-Curtis, based in the USA. She's the Chief Innovation Officer at Orrick, Henrington and Sutcliffe LLP. Wendy, welcome.
Thank you.
Olga Mack also joins us from the USA. She's Vice President and CEO of Parley Pro LexisNexis. Hi, Olga.
Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be here.
And Maya Markovic also joins us from the USA, Executive Director of the Justice Technology Association and former Chief Growth Officer at Next Law Labs. Hi, Maya.
Hi.
And moving across to Canada, we've got Noah Wazeberg, former co-founder and CEO of Kira Systems, which sold to Latera last year, and now he's heading up Zuva Inc., where he is co-founder and CEO. Good to talk to you again, Noah.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And finally, we have Chris Bentley from Canada. He's the Managing Director, Legal Innovation Zone and Law Practice Program at Ryerson University. Hi, Chris.
How you doing?
So that's our panelists. And just to give our audience a bit more context where each of you sit in the legal tech ecosystem, I was wondering if you could just each give us, and we've got quite a few of us to do, so please give us your express elevator pitch on your organizations. And Chris, let's start with you.
Sure, thanks very much. 7.5 years ago, my colleague Hirsch Perlis and I co-founded the Legal Innovation Zone out of what is now Toronto Metropolitan University. We incubate startups who are determined to build better legal solutions for the consumers of legal services, whether they're people or businesses. We provide support to organizations, and we do our best to disrupt, modernize the legal system.
Great. And going in reverse order to the intros, Noah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Noah Wazeberg. As you mentioned previously, I co-founded and was the CEO of Kira Systems, which I think 18 of the top 25 global M&A firms used to do faster and more accurate contract review, including Orrick, and a bunch of others. And about 11 months ago, we sold Kira Systems to Latera, where it continues to thrive, and spun out a company called Zuva. Zuva aims to provide the world's best contract analysis AI and make it dead simple to incorporate in your application. So you can plug our API into another application and get the world's best contract AI like that.
Sounds good. And Maya Markovic, give us your pitch, please.
Sure, thank you. Well, I have a background that spans VC, law, behavioral science, and change design. As you mentioned, I worked for 5 years with Next Law Labs, Next Law Ventures at Denton's as their Chief Growth Officer for Next Law Labs. I'm currently Justice Tech Executive in Residence at Village Capital and Executive Director at the Justice Technology Association, which is a nonprofit trade association that supports tech solutions contributing to a more fair legal system. And I also advise multiple high-growth startups, investors, and venture funds, and I consult on legal innovation and deliver legal technology, process, and business growth services.
Thanks very much, Maya. Indeed, it was hard to pick from your vast LinkedIn profile of which ones to highlight there, but thank you for that. Olga Mack, would you like to introduce you and your organization quickly?
Absolutely. Delighted to be here. I'm Olga Mack. I am building the future of law for in-house professionals. Today, my focus is on LexisNexis' ability to deliver ELM and CLM all in one. So it is easy to use and highly collaborative and delightful for in-house professionals. I do quite a few other things, but this is my primary focus today, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Great. And finally, Wendy, your little 15 to 30 seconds pitch, please.
So I listen to our clients to help change our model from something that feels like Blockbuster to something that feels more like Netflix. And to do that, I partner with universities like Chris, legal tech companies like what Noah and Olya have, social justice organizations like what Maya described, because all of that is changing how and if we can change the way we deliver legal services.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, well, let's just kick off straight into, I guess, what's becoming a traditional first question as we move around the world, the headlines that are happening in your neck of the woods. Noah, can I get you to kick off with, the headline in your ecosystem that's standing out for you at the moment and why it's important in your market?
I think things that I'm seeing a lot are, first of all, just broad things related to the tech ecosystem, right? Like there was a whole ton of funding going into a whole ton of places, and now there is less money going into companies, but still a lot of companies that have a lot of money left around, plus companies that are growing just off customer revenue. So I think that dynamic of money flowing in, money flowing out is an interesting one. Like certainly running a tech company, you exist within a spectrum of other tech companies. Like most of our employees, don't necessarily leave Kira or Zuba to go to other legal tech companies. They leave to go to other technology companies. And so depending on what's happening with the dynamic of that market, it has a big impact on how it is for us in business. So I think that's thing number one. And piece number two, just for me, like I've been in the contracts ecosystem since 2011 when we started out Kira, and it's getting a lot of attention these days. And that's really fun to see. I think on the law firm side, it's actually getting less attention because of what I think a dominant business we built with Kira, right? Like it just is so business as usual right now that I don't even think it's as much news there. But on the corporate side, CLMs are all the rage, and there's both, I think, a lot of hype and a lot of reality going on there. And a lot of companies are pretty heavily funded and trying to do great things. And it's sort of really interesting to be a participant in that ecosystem, as well as to watch a bunch of companies do great there.
Indeed. Yeah, certainly all the rage
really
in the contracting side.
What's that?
And sticking with in Canada, Chris, can you just give us your headline that's standing out for you?
I borrowed a headline from Great Britain, actually, The Economist, how smarter AI will change creativity. And I thought there were 3 points I'd make about that are relevant to legal tech ecosystem in Canada, maybe elsewhere. First is the second part of legal tech is tech. And technology and its capacity is improving exponentially, regardless of what we decide to do or use and do with it. Secondly, the fact that it is improving significantly will enable other players to serve those that the legal community traditionally has not, who are the 80% of consumers and most small businesses who have legal needs. And the third really is to say, don't look back because somebody might be gaining on you. And the only direction is forward, and it's as fast as you can go.
Okay, great. And skipping it down across the border and just going across my film strip from left to right, Wendy, can you give us your headline that's piquing your interest?
Sure. So I had 2 data points, and I think over the conversation we'll decide if they align or not. But one, the headline that there isn't enough talent for legal operations roles. And I think there's a statistic recently that 75% of law departments are hiring and or have identified legal operations as a strategic priority. And the second data point, building on what Noah said, so Legal Complex is an organization that tracks funding rounds for legal. And they reported from Q2 to Q1 this year, 2022, there was a decline in the number of companies getting funding from 90 to 36. And that's the lowest number that they've seen since 2018.
Wow, it's a precipitous drop, and we do have a section of our discussion today sort of devoted to the funding and sort of recessionary vibes that are happening at the moment. So thank you, Wendy. Next up, Olga, what's keeping your attention right now?
Good headline. So I like the headline "Artificial Lawyer." It read "Legal tech funding plus valuation announcements are going astray." You know, I know there is a lot of excitement about legal tech being a thing. You know, we're fortunate to live in a lifetime where this is happening because it wasn't always this way. So I'm really excited about the attention. I do get a little concerned when we kind of watch valuations and funding like Hunger Games. There's, you know, that's not the point. The point is how much value you add and how much you can transform the lives of others. So I'd like us to shift back to the basics, and for me, that's the basics. And I think the recession correction will focus us to talk about value and what we create and the legacy we leave.
Okay, great. Yeah, I saw that headline. I sort of agree with you there, Olga. And finally, Maya, what's grabbing your attention right now?
Sure. Well, on a completely different perspective, I was very gratified to see that last week, the state of Oregon in the US gave final approval to a licensed paralegal program that will go into effect next year. It's going to allow participants to provide limited legal services in family law, including divorces and custody matters, landlord-tenant cases, two areas where there's just a huge unmet need due to these, you know, vast and increasing numbers of self-represented litigants. So the licensed paralegals will be able to assist clients with forms, depositions, settlement negotiations, and prepare clients for court appearances, but they can't argue in court themselves. So this is incredibly important because there's a massively underserved population in our communities that is not able to access their rights. And the legal industry is currently set up, as we all know, for lawyers really to run as a business and not client-centric. So those that are currently helping, you know, whether through pro bono or legal services organizations, are just doing unbelievable work, but they're overwhelmed and under-resourced. So we need different models like these. And we also believe that technology can and should be part of the solution.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. That's really great. Just get a really broad representation of the things that are really, you know, hitting home for each of you right now in your parts of the world. And the next sort of area that we always sort of get into is just trying to just deconstruct a little bit for both the United States and in Canada, the core pillars of your legal ecotech system. So not just the tech companies themselves, but the other bits of infrastructure that go into making up, I guess, your community. So things like the main peak bodies or tech hubs or most prolific incubators, that type of thing. Maya, if we just stick with you on this one, do you want to just talk through what the main pillars are in the US and then maybe followed from the Canadian perspective with Chris? So Maya, take it away.
Yeah, sure. Well, with respect to legal tech specific incubators, with the exception of the LexisNexis accelerator, I think they're mostly embedded in firms or law schools like Hastings and Duke, like firms, you know, obviously across the pond in places like Fuse at Allen and Overy. I still find it somewhat decentralized, although I'd say, you know, organizations like ILTA and Clock have their finger on the pulse of what's happening within their constituencies with respect to technology and innovation. And there's also the Legal Tech Hub that Nikki Shaver and Jurgen Flink are spearheading with kind of deep dive content in, you know, dozens of legal tech categories and developing a bunch of experts and that kind of thing. So online, I think I think we're going to see a lot of that as well.
Is there a US peak body for legal technology? Australia has the ALTA, and then there's the European and others. I'm just wondering, I've never really quite put my finger on what would be the peak body if it exists in the US?
I mean, I would love to hear what others think. I mean, to be honest with you, I think that ILTA kind of is, it says it's international, but it's very US centric. And I know that as a, and there's also Legal Week, obviously, as a conference that happens, and ILTA Con. But those are very, it seems like they're largely US centric. What do others think?
I think there's a very vibrant community on LinkedIn discussing these topics all day, every day. It's not organized by any one person or organization. It's the power of decentralization, which is where we're going anyway, and we're experiencing it online.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
All that, yep, sorry.
I was just agreeing. It's very decentralized. It was an interesting or thought-provoking question when I was thinking about it. I was like, there's not really much.
Yeah, it makes it much more grassroots and organic. And hopefully that's a better thing for innovation all around.
Yeah, indeed. Well, heading up to Canada, Chris, what would you say are the main sort of pillars for the Canadian legal tech system there?
So I'd start by focusing on picking up on what was said about community, and focus on three major metropolitan areas: Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal, for similar but also different reasons. Toronto, where our legal innovation zone is located, but where University of Toronto, the development of AI, lots of research, huge numbers of tech incubators of different types, the Creative Destruction Lab and others in Toronto, have given rise to a real interest and an attraction of a lot of attraction to many very talented innovators. And we've had a number of tech and legal tech companies which would claim Toronto as their home. And of course, it's the financial capital of Canada. And yes, I was going to give a shout out to our great Noah, who educated a whole lot of law firms on the possibilities of tech. So you have the coming together of large law firms, big corporate law departments, great innovators such as Noah, a research engine, and with legal innovation hubs like ourselves sprinkled in there. You go to Vancouver, of course, the home of Clio. They have a similar ecosystem, largish law firms, capital attraction from different sources, innovators starting to spread out, and a government that's been quite supportive of innovation in different ways. And then you go over to Montreal, and of course, has always, Quebec has focused its attention on innovation in Montreal, University of Montreal with their Cyber Justice Lab, and some of the developers of AI have gone there to participate in different projects. So I would say the development of communities, particularly in those three, but not to exclude Ottawa and others, I'll get in trouble if we exclude, or even my hometown of London, Ontario. No, they're not really quite in the same league.
There's some okay Alberta stuff. Calgary and Edmonton have got like a thing.
Calgary and Edmonton, the Toronto Waterloo corridor for technology generally, not necessarily legal further down, but it's community in a broader and different sense than what might have been spoken of before.
I would add, in the US, just like what Chris described, we have great incubation hubs that are tied to universities. So you see that in the DC area, we have our technology corridor. You see that certainly, of course, in the Bay Area, in California, Austin, Pittsburgh, and you also have pretty dense presence of VC money, and then also the local government doing much like what Chris was doing. There's several early stage companies that we're working with, all of which got a grant out of incubation hubs like what Chris was talking about, and great support from the universities.
Wendy, I was wondering whether, when I track the startups coming out of the US, legal tech startups, and I say it's US, and I also try and put broadly where they're from, and it's two buckets nearly all the time. It's New York or the Bay Area. they're the top two by far. Is there a sense whether one is slightly ahead of the other or more prolific than the other, West Coast versus East Coast type of thing, or is it roughly the same?
So we actually have, and I would encourage everybody listening, for free on the ORIC website, it's called the Observatory, and we track 600 legal technology companies. I think we're almost at 700 now, and it's primarily in the United States. I think we've got about 150, 200 outside, but you can sort where they are, and also you can sort if there's diversity in their leadership. I think we historically think about the Bay Area is the most disruptive and innovative area, but again, Austin, other areas. And I think the other thing
Chicago,
Chicago, yeah.
Like Latera is no joke, Relativity is no joke, I Manage, all out of there, which are all like 3 just giant companies.
Yeah, and they're not early. I mean, these are later stages.
No, these are like 3 of the biggest.
And you also see people moving, right? The cost of living in those areas. So you're gonna, I think, start to see some really interesting development as you follow the talent and then the university's commitment. So that may have been the path, David, New York and California, but I'm really excited to see what the future is.
Indeed. Yeah, we'll definitely have to check out the observatory and just filter and check out the data on all of that. In terms of legal tech investment funds, specifically legal tech investment funds, maybe back to you. Oh, actually, Olga, let's bring you in here. Do you know of any legal tech specific investment funds in the US? And then maybe back to you, Chris or Noah, on the Canadian side.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, there's quite a lot of money that's been flowing in. 21 alone brought, $9.1 billion with M&A, so that's a lot of money. You see legal tech funds raising, 28.5. When they plan to raise 26, that's a pretty sizable, seat shop. So you see quite a lot of activity. You also see, big players, being attracted to the field. You see Raymond James, you see Bloomberg, you see Wolters Kluwer, you see Relics, you see Thomson Reuters. It's no secret that Carlico was part of that journey as well. So you see quite a lot of activity. There's a lot of money flowing in. I look at it much broader than sort of what's categorized as legal tech. There's a lot of adjacent fields that have a lot of legal implications, and there are folks who are investing in this broadly. Increasingly, you see fintech and regtech and other technology that incorporates compliance by design, that incorporates various sort of legal parts. They're not only legal tech, they may not be even classified as legal tech, but you see legal tech to be broadly spread out. Depending how you count it, it's a really massive opportunity, and it is increasingly embedded in all kinds of places, from HR to finance to marketing to everywhere. And I think we're going to see a whole lot more of this. I think it's going to be really hard to separate legal tech sometimes from other tech, because compliance is something you just have to do, no matter what how you make your money.
Indeed, it's definitely a lot of carryover into other areas. Wendy, were you going to say something?
Yeah, so Olga is absolutely right. I think the vast majority is from tech funds, but they're off the top of my head. ORIC has a legal tech fund. Zach Posner has the legal tech fund. That's the name of it. And then Thomson Reuters just created a separate VC legal tech fund. So you're seeing funds start to emerge focused just on this area. But again, absolutely right. The vast majority comes from tech or adjacent funds.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, there's a couple others like Bryce Catalyst, a few other people like Mike Suchland and Jeroen Plank and stuff around who do interesting things. But my experience with raising was we just went to a general tech fund, and we went to the one that we went to, not that there aren't some good Canadian funds, but we worked, and at Zuva, lucky to be working again with
and that's the exciting part, that legal tech is no longer a niche, right? That it's
and for me, it's also like, I think there is value to some of the legal tech funds, and I think they may get it, but I think one of the narratives in the early days of Kira was all these places talking about how like VCs just don't get legal tech, and I'm not sure whether that was true or not, but like right now, I think a lot of people see that it's just an opportunity with a market with great opportunity. And so you got general tech investors who just feel like being in there. And for me, working with a general tech investor was really positive in that the people that you were being compared against were not like other legal tech companies, but it was just like best in class tech companies. And I think that that's a positive discipline, or it was for us.
Yeah, we had exactly the same experience, and it's amazing what you learn from people who just built all kinds of tech, and that cross-pollination was incredibly valuable. And I think just like legal practice is kind of, becoming less isolated, and you see lawyers move across functions and doing different things. Same with investment and legal tech. And I think it's a huge positive that it's not just segregated in one space.
Yeah. And Noah, just to keep you on here for a moment, as far as your journey through with Curious Systems and now Zuva, can you just sort of take us through from a founder's perspective in Canada, what the key, I guess, touch points were that helped you in the ecosystem from, starting from scratch to an exit and beyond?
We weren't huge users of kind of like the formal ecosystem with Curious Systems, partially because I think some of the formal ecosystem didn't really exist when we were tiny. And then by the time we got we might well have found value in some of the incubators or something like that. But by the time the incubators were getting formed, we were already a substantial sized company off revenue. And so it just didn't seem like something that was going to add as much value at that point. And so I think we've tried to be participants in the ecosystem, I go give talks like U of T or stuff like that, but happily, and talk to people who reach out to me, but I don't think we took advantage of as much of that stuff, or the Canadian funders as much. And really for a lot of the time we were just heads down working. Where we did get a lot of benefits though was there was, especially in Toronto, a pretty strong community of the law firms here and legal innovation people who would just get together. And yet, for some quirky reason, the Canadian law firms were sort of more likely to have knowledge management innovation people earlier than most US law firms. And most big law firms in Canada had them, where I think now it's maybe more common, but I think people in roles like Wendy's were pretty rare in the US 7 or 8 years ago. Whereas they existed in Canada. And I think that community of people were really, really, really helpful to us. But we always kind of defined our community as partially a Canadian one, but also partially just a legal tech one, right? So there were other founders that I interacted with who were in New York or California or wherever, right? And certainly the Canadian firms were super helpful to us, but so were a bunch of UK and US and German firms and Indian and even Australian, right? So, and other places. So I think that we always kind of viewed that legal tech one as our sort of prime community as opposed to anything else, and it wasn't geographically limited. I think maybe running an Australian tech company, if you're a Canadian tech company, I have a fairly strong perspective that you cannot have a viable business selling tech to Canadian law firms. I don't think it's a big enough market. At Curious Systems Canada, despite having 5 of the 7 sisters law firms in Canada as our customers, Canada represented about 5% or less of our total revenue. And so it got to the stage where I was going to the UK so much that at one point someone in an article said that I was a UK-based founder. And I was in New York a ton, and I had worked there. And I think Wendy knows that I was out in San Francisco. And you go completely everywhere. And I think that's how we sort of thought about things. We were in Toronto and we were connected in Toronto, and we definitely made time for people in Toronto, but I felt as comfortable at ILTA as I did in Toronto.
Yeah, well, speaking of, I guess, ILTA and sort of those large flagship organizations and in particular conferences. So, and I guess your perspective would be interesting here from the Curious Systems days. What would be the key events in Canada or the US that you just got to be at to be part of it? And then secondly, has that changed? Are there new conferences or events that you'll be taking Zuva to?
There are things. So with Zuba, we have a very different focus. So with Cure Systems, we were really strong in selling to professional service firms, right? Like I mentioned, a pretty heavy market share among law firms. Also, like I think we had parts of all the big four sort of audit consulting firms as our customers. With Zuba, we do have some organizations like that who are customers, but a lot of our customers are actually other technology companies who are selling things to law firms. So in a weird way, like I went to Clock, but in a weird way at Clock, a lot of the people that I felt like seeing were actually other tech vendors who were there to sell to legal ops people. So things have changed a bit. In terms of conferences, to me, there's sort of three prime events that I always found I got sort of most amped for with kind of Kira Zuba, maybe four. And I think of them as kind of on a spectrum of different activities, and then a few other ones that I thought were neat and had really good audiences. So first in the year, if you're selling to large law firms, is the Legaltech Legal Week. You've then got, it's in New York, it's in normally January. It's frankly a bit grim, but like lots of people go and are around New York that week, even if they're not at the conference. Second big one is Clock. So if you're selling to a more legal operations, corporate type focus, a lot of people tend to go to that. And I think it's gotten ever more prominent. I think there is really good turnout there. A challenging ratio of vendors to legal operations people, which actually is just fine if you're someone like me who's trying to sell to other legal technology companies. I think can be a little bit trickier if you're trying to sell to legal ops people, but there are definitely companies that have stood out there and done well. Number three is ILTA, which tends to sort of shift around. So Clock would be in about March, sorry, I think April, maybe actually May this past year, April to May in Vegas. Third is ILTA. It shifts around to somewhere exceedingly hot right just before Labor Day. It is kind of like the fun version of legal tech, like where legal tech people are there because they kind of have to be there. I think ILTA I've always been shocked by how great of a sort of community feel there is, and how sort of casual but fun it is. And I think if you're selling to large law firms, including from the UK or Australia or anything like that, historically ILTA has been well worth attending. And then finally, the other one that I put on that kind of like big four calendar is Legal Geek, kind of a newer one. Started out as one day, now it's up to like maybe 2 days. I know a bunch of us who are on this call have been there. And if I think of a spectrum of like grim to fun with New York Legal Tech on the sort of like more grim side, ILTA was the funnest. And now Legal Geek has like gone and blown that out. And it's just like as close as you can get to a party day while working. Really a great experience, but actually like quite amazing people come out to the event. So I think those are four really good ones. Depending on the audience you're trying to reach, though, there can be other things that are really, really, really impactful. Like I remember I got invited, some of the Financial Times innovative lawyers things can be really useful if you're trying to connect with like very senior lawyers, like general counsels or managing partners of law firms who tend to go out to those. There can also be a lot of like really smaller things. Like some of the best things that I went to were like, I once got invited to talk to like a small group of general counsels. I once got to go to a retreat with the executive directors of a bunch of firms, I think including Oric, right? And it's just like, there can be these little tiny events where you're stuck with like 15 people and you really get to know them and they can be super valuable. Also, if you ever get the chance, if you're selling to law firms and you ever get the chance to go to a partner retreat, that is definitely not to be missed.
Awesome. No, that's such a great list of events. And I love how you put that on the scale there. Wendy, from your perspective on the law firm side, Chief Legal Innovation Officer, what events are not to be missed in your perspective?
So Noah did an extraordinary job. I think I saw him and talked with him at all of the ones that he listed. So
That's why they were so great, really.
exactly. There you go. Not the I was stuck at a meeting with Oric one. And Noah and I are good friends. So there's humor and lots of affection when we make jokes. No, nothing else. The other one I would flag, which is new this year. So the Legaltech Fund, which I mentioned, is actually doing a summit in Miami in December. And it's a little bit like a Shark Week structure where there's going to be VC and folks to come in. And there are a couple of those that are run out of California also, where you get several founders together and folks looking to invest, and you get a chance to talk about your product. But I think Noah did a great job of listing all the ones that we think are the best.
I also did not mention the ABA Legal Tech Show, which if you are selling to a smaller firm demographic is totally prime.
Great, thanks.
And there are a bunch of newer events too, like Troman's has an event that seems to have good energy. I think there's like a whole bunch of other ones that have good energy with them, and maybe smaller groups.
Yeah, there's definitely more coming through the pipeline every day. Well, just to change gears slightly and just still sticking with the theme of what's happening in each of your jurisdictions, just on the regulatory side and some changes. I think a couple were mentioned at the top of the call. Maya, can I bring you here in on the US perspective on just the key bits of change on the regulatory front? You already, I think, talked about one, but what else is there that's happening in the USA?
Well, chiefly, I do think that it is, there's a lot of regulatory reform advocacy going on with respect to the unauthorized practice of law and the rules of professional responsibility. And I think that is the major opening that most people are seeing in terms of the way that technology can support folks that need access to legal services but are unable to or uninterested in working directly with attorneys. So there's a lot of that direct to consumer side of things. I mean, with respect, I think other people can probably speak more eloquently on the most recent updates on things like privacy and cybersecurity. I know that those are things that are continually being reviewed. And I know that, there are large governmental departments also dealing with those.
Did I see an update somewhere around some regulatory sandboxes, maybe in California that were...
No. Yes, but not in California.
Right, sorry. But was there some change there that was...
It's a real shame.
Yeah. Around Ontario, right?
It's part and parcel with a lot of the regulatory reform advocacy. Yes, so there are some, extraordinarily well developed and well run sandboxes across the country, and several more that are kind of in the process of being assessed and or implemented. The most well known, of course, is the Utah Regulatory Sandbox, which was the first one out, and which were, as the name suggests, provides an opportunity for organizations or initiatives that want to try to see if their business would work without the constraints of current regulatory environment. So that is, there are dozens of legal tech companies and justice tech companies that are working within those. And Arizona is another one that most people know about as well, which is more limited to business structure. But that enabled, the likes of Elevate to open in Arizona. So there's traction. It's moving slowly, unfortunately, because it kind of depends who's in charge in each of the states. Sometimes the regulatory reform is kind of the bailiwick of the judiciary, in which case it actually can move a little more quickly. If it's if it's under the umbrella of the state bar, it moves, unfortunately, a lot more slowly. There's a lot of conversations going on around that. And California is kind of is unfortunately not as far ahead as everybody would potentially expect from the outside. But smaller states like North Carolina, Michigan are stepping up on those fronts.
And David, we all rolled our eyes knowingly because in the last, I think, 2 weeks, the California Senate Judiciary Committee passed a law that would limit the bar's authority to set up regulatory sandboxes. That bill is not law. It still has to go through the whole process to become a law, but it was not a positive indicator of the direction that they're going.
Yeah, exactly.
And
So-
something similar happened in Washington State. They had a sandbox for a period of time and then changed their rules to not allow that to continue.
So, David, if I could just jump in with a Canadian perspective on sandboxes. I mean, I remember sandboxes as a kid and I used to love them. But I hopefully grew out of much of them. I think the challenge in Canada, we've got 3 different sandboxes that have been set up by 3 of our regulators. There are quite a number of restrictions, some more focused on not making any money, not for profit. They offer relatively little other than the guarantee that if you're accepted in, they won't come after you. And that's pretty thin gruel when companies are trying to compete across jurisdictions. As Noah made the point, it's tough to make a market in any one Canadian province. And when you have a common law jurisdiction from which we evolved, England and Wales, which don't really have restrictions. And I think the real question is, to what extent do you want to spend more time? Do we as a profession want to spend more time worrying about sandboxes or tech innovators, as opposed to doing what the big 4 consultancies and the Zooms and the others are doing, looking at consumers, what's their problem and how far can we go before we rub shoulders with a regulator. And in Canada, it would be an interesting conversation because we have a different structure than in the States. We have a constitution with certain rights for all Canadians. And I think it would be an interesting conversation as if regulators actually step in and try to shut down some of what has been going on for years in the big 4 consultancies and is now only accelerating.
Some really good points there, Chris, and thank you, guys. Well, on just the main, or another, I guess, but probably a large conversation to have that we talked to at the start in terms of going from the record numbers we saw in legal tech funding. Of course, that was the broad industry record as well, but this specifically on legal tech funding, and now looking at the environment, quite a recessionary feel to it at the moment. Olga and Noah, coming from the founder perspective, I'd like to start with you on this. How has that sort of impacted, I guess, your companies and just the sector as a whole?
Look, I mean, I think it's no secret that the pandemic has sped up the actual digital transformation process in law. It's if you look before and after, it's a very, very different world. And historically, this is not going to be the first recession that will do the same. Because we have seen a lot of statistics that legal department, I'm focused on the legal transformation, digital transformation for in-house lawyers. So that's what I'm going to speak to, because I used to be one for 15 years. This is my tribe. I love these people. I serve these people. So that's my focus. And we know that they're going to do more. They're going to do more, and they're going to do more with less. And historically, that's the great time to approach them with digital transformation solutions. That happened in the last 2 recessions, and it will happen again. And so, this combined with, the impact of pandemic, I think we're gonna have a very changed world. And plus, we're seeing quite a lot of new demands, both of legislative, GDPR, CCPA, that stuff, but then also ESG and being prepared for things you don't expect, like, various Black Swan events, and being able to speak the language of business. So there's quite a lot of things going on. And I do think that the corrections that come in the system, they are blessings in disguise. They focus us on what matters, and what matters is value delivered to our customers. And they focus our customers to ask the right questions and to be more educated, better purchasers. And I would like to see nothing more than purchasers that are highly educated, because that really makes the selling process so much more exciting and streamlined.
So if I think about COVID and its impact, I think actually the immediate impact on us at Cure Systems was not positive, really. I think a lot of law firms and lawyers got really focused on just doing the basics, right? Like making sure that every lawyer had Zoom, that every lawyer had a laptop. There were kind of like base pieces of technology that need to be adopted and did. But then I think coming out of that, I think a lot more lawyers were used to working with technology, and I think it's been positive. And my understanding is the company has sort of continued to thrive as things kind of get back to sort of this, but normal, but in the new way. I think, though, there are both positives and negatives to the new world in terms of adoption of legal tech. Obviously, the plus is that people are used to working more electronically. I think that's really good. Second thing is our technology at Cure Systems was heavily used in mergers and acquisitions, and there was a lot of mergers and acquisitions over the last bunch of years, so it just gives more opportunities for it to be used. I think on the negative side, I do think it's probably a bit harder to spread innovation in a virtual world, right? Like previously, I think you would have situations where there were, like I can remember a partner at one of our customer law firms at the time, where he was able to go kind of like partner to partner and like go and visit them and be like, hey, you know, you should use this tech, it's awesome. And you could have that spread between associates. And I don't know that there are those same level of kind of connections and reach outs and serendipitous interactions in today's less office-centric world. And I think that makes adoption harder. For us with Zuba, like we sell very differently than law firms. Like a lot of the time we're than to law firms. A lot of time we're selling to developers or product managers, or maybe a sort of citizen developer at a corporation, or like in a legal department, or maybe in a law firm. And those people, what we tried to do is really optimize our website so that, like, if you have any kind of question, that you could literally come to our website, sign up, find all the information that you might have, sign up, and pretty soon even buy without ever talking to us, and like just give us your credit card, but like literally be able to see our pricing. And we reveal a lot more product information than we ever would have at Kiro. We had a more field sales selling motion. And I think that new sort of more product-led growth motion is something that you're seeing more in tech now, and that just has been a change in the technology market over the last like 5 or 10 years. And so I think we're seeing more of that. It probably was accelerated a bit by COVID, but I think it's just the way that the sort of best-in-class tech is sold these days. And so we're trying to do more of that.
Yeah, it's good to hear it from the founder perspective. And I also wanted to get your thoughts, Maya, as well, because you do, you advise, I think, 3 or more startups on the advisory board that are probably early stages. They're going through this quite a recessionary environment, not a lot of funding around anymore, or maybe they raised a whole ton of funding earlier in the piece. From their perspective, what's the impact that you're finding with some of the earlier stage legal tech startups there? And I'll also get your perspective, maybe in a further question later, on access to justice and how, again, the more recessionary environment is impacting that.
Sure. I mean, I'll just start out by echoing what Olga said, and Noah. I mean, though you would think that firms, logically would take advantage of downtime to investigate options to increase efficiency and diversity and retention, I do see that happening a little bit, but nowhere near at the level you'd expect from other industries. So I also, with respect to fundraising, I mean, I think that, what I hear from the startups is it's a tough place right now to be raising. I do work both independently on advisory boards for startups, as well as kind of representing their interests as part of the Justice Technology Association for justice tech startups. And they are many of them are founded by people with lived experience with the problems that they're trying to solve. So those are also is a double-edged sword, because there's it's both a challenge and an opportunity. Those are going to be the best solutions and the ones that will have ultimately the most market traction, but they are usually also founded by underrepresented and overlooked founders. However, I will, and who are usually the ones that are, getting the smallest piece of the pie of any sort of investment funding. However, I will say that I've also heard that in this kind of tough market for fundraising, that they are actually used to hustling a whole lot more, and so they're actually pretty much heads down business as usual, and they're not used to easy money. So they're just doing what they've always been doing and having pretty significant successes along the way. So it's a little bit of everything, I guess, right now.
And Wendy, from your perspective on the law firm side, on the innovation side, this type of environment, what sort of impact does that have on your activities in the innovation space?
So what's been coined in the US at least is the resignation nation, right? The idea that people are walking away from their profession and really, to the extent that they're staying, looking for the most meaningful work. That creates an incredible appetite for legal technology in a way that I just don't think we were as focused. And it's the same year, it's been coined as the year for the war for talent. So you put those things together, and legal technology is really critical in our ability to be competitive, to drawing the next generation of lawyers, to keeping the current generation of lawyers. So I think that's actually very exciting and probably an unanticipated consequence of COVID. As Maya talked about our worldwide challenges with access to justice and scalable legal technology, when and if the regulations change. I saw a statistic that said that they estimated it's a $1 trillion unmet consumer market. So I think that you probably all saw the headlines of 2 female founders, which I love to celebrate, who created a new legal tech tool that helps you with a prenup agreement. Imagine if you could consume legal services without all the friction, which is the basis, at least in the US, for all the lawyer jokes. And if you could do that in your personal life, you're absolutely going to expect that in your professional life. And so we're excited, we're eager, because it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to solve the access to justice issues, but it's also going to have an enormous impact on the type of law that we practice. So we're watching, but we all had that moment where we paused and made a face when we talked about California. I think we were all discouraged that the regulation change is not happening as quickly as many of us here would like. And I think, Chris, your point about even in the UK with the different rules, how far has it gone, is something that we're all watching really closely.
I totally agree, Wendy. I think, the number of people that are dealing with legal problems without an attorney are growing. I expect that, as we see more impact on courts of eviction proceedings in the next couple of years, et cetera, I think we're going to see more and more of that need for consumers directly, and even more of a need to get informed, ethical technology to help address that gap. So the market opportunity, as Wendy said, it's almost truly unmeasurable. It's so large.
Chris, did you have any thoughts on, to sort of back off on those points around the impact on that sort of direct to consumer legal tech market and also the courts?
Yeah, let me start with the courts. COVID delayed things in many courts. We've been suffering from large delays in our civil and family courts for years. COVID's made that worse. Recession means that there is even less money for governments to deal with the pressures. There are 2 possible routes. Courts could, somewhat unusually given their history, to think far more creatively about how to resolve problems, starting with the consumer first instead of the court first. Early indications are that a number of our courts are trying to go backwards in terms of in-person appearances as opposed to remote. backwards in terms of procedures. So early indications aren't great. I think the second point, which will be exacerbated by the recession, if 80% of your people and most of your small businesses are not able to, we're not able to use traditional legal routes for resolution before a recession, there certainly are going to be even more who aren't going to be able to use it afterwards. So you have a huge number of people. Somebody mentioned Blockbuster much earlier in our, Wendy, it was you. So
Good
you
analogy.
have a huge number of people who don't like the existing model or can't use the existing model, and they may find their own model. And I, as someone who was in government for 10 years, I worry about a government where an institution, the courts and justice, are not fully accessible by 80+% of the people, accessible in a meaningful way. They will go off and find their own solutions. And we've seen that in many different areas. And so that it'll be interesting to see what happens just over the next few years. And I think the appetite from consumers is going to increase exponentially for different means of getting an answer. May not be a perfect answer, but it's an answer.
We'll definitely look forward to seeing how this space all evolves in this current environment. Certainly some challenges ahead. I'd like to just transition to just kind of a bit of a closing, sort of future gazing type of question around what you each expect to see more of from, say, now until, say, 2025, or if that's too far, maybe in the next year or so in the USA and Canada. Noah, do you want to kick off on that one?
I think we're going to continue to see really interesting things in the contracts market. There's just so much attention and money floating around there. And I think we're going to see more companies adopting tech there, but also companies putting out just sort of more fully featured systems. Still don't think we have a clear winner in that space. And I just am going to be kind of watching and participating, seeing how that plays out.
Olga, how about you? What are you sort of seeing is going to be kind of dominating the space in the short term going forward?
I think we're going to see increasingly more and more legal compliance, regulatory everywhere, not just in legal tech, but in HR, in marketing, in sales, and all of that innovation and software, because and that will be embedded in by design. I think the category of legal tech will continue to exist if your customer is in fact a lawyer, but lawyers are not the only consumers of innovation in law, and it's not always called legal tech. And I love seeing all the innovation in legal tech that we don't even call legal. That is just life. And life is full of law. And technology is really helpful in streamlining the service of law, the compliance with law, the relationship with law. And I look forward to days where our relationship with law will no longer be broken. It will be streamlined and it will be enjoyable.
That'd be a great thing to see. Maya, if I could turn to you on this question, and just considering you've long been a keen watcher of all the new legal technologies coming into the space, probably particularly with your role at Next Law Labs, you would have seen various trends kind of come and go, I guess, or types of technology that are flavors of the month or flavors of the year. What do you think will be the flavor for 2023, 24, 25 in the near term?
I mean, I wish I had the answer for that one. I think that, I mean, my thoughts, I think, are really, at a broader level. I think we're going to see increased consolidation of the market. This is nothing, major, but nothing that nobody already knows. Everybody knows this already.
Did you say nothing major?
Well, I mean, nothing that you haven't heard before, but increased consolidation of the market, platformization, more institutional capital flowing into the sector as it becomes more well known. that this is an antiquated system that's ripe for disruption. And I think that that is across the board for all the different kind of subcategories of legal tech. And with respect to justice tech, you know, I've seen some of the same trends that we saw in legal tech's boom in the last 5-6 years happen in justice tech, only more quickly. So I anticipate, you know, increased momentum on both fronts.
That's great. Some great observations. Wendy, you guys have, maybe you could draw on some of the insights from the observatory, I guess. What's the observatory telling you? Are there any things bubbling to the surface or things that are about to bubble to the surface in your view in the near term for what we're going to see in the legal tech market?
So I think the co-panelists identified a lot of the trends that we're seeing in terms of the number of companies focused on particular solutions. You know, building on what Maya was saying, as the customer, it's hard to have 10 pinpoint solutions. It's hard to take 10 contracts through your contracting process. It's difficult to do the security and privacy audit on 10 new tools. And we are a cloud forward, cloud facing. I think we're one of the largest firms most committed to cloud, and yet it's still difficult. So this idea, and Oli was talking about this a little bit earlier, and even who's funding, are we going to continue to go out and buy legal tech, or are we going to buy tech that has solutions for legal problems? And Salesforce is a great example in terms of what they're building, even for CLM. It's much easier for the customer in some ways to buy from an existing provider than to onboard somebody new. And so that's something I think we're going to watch and see, and going to the consolidation that was described, you know, how does that all come together?
It's a really valid point in terms of that sort of enterprise existing tech. I know it's a question I ask almost most frequently to corporate clients when they're looking to implement tech. The first question is, what are you using in Microsoft, or what are you using in Salesforce, or, you know, those big enterprise? What's your enterprise tech stack look like, and have you looked at that first? It's sort of the more common question I find myself asking before getting into specific solutions.
This is what Noah alluded to. When you fundraise from tech investors, they will very quickly tell you that your competition is not only your legal tech peers, that companies are increasingly embedding this type of legal solutions and compliance everywhere. So you are doing yourself a disservice if you are not, you know, fundraising from a broader audience, socializing with a broader audience, being influenced by ideas of the broader audience, because law is not a niche. We're mainstream, and everybody is now treating us as they're supposed to, and we should treat them the same way.
Yeah, like our part of our thesis with Zuva is that people will start to embed contract analysis AI, or just contracts AI, into applications like CRM, ERP,
Right.
document
They
management
already
system,
do.
HCM. But I think there's way more opportunity to embed it like much more deeply in there. And I think our technology like ours can help. Like, in fact, our closest competitor is a product by Google. So
I didn't mean to say your technology is not special and unique, though.
no, don't worry.
I can say it's special, unique, and I love it. And not because I want to suck up to you, but it's true.
No, don't worry. But I think
with
like completely, like, you're just going to see a lot of these things. Like, I think one of the interesting questions for the contracts ecosystem is, like, there's no question that contracts are really important, but do you need a separate system, or is it just going to play out where, you know, the sales team needs 6 data pieces, like
and you
renewal,
meet people where they are, and you make it simple. And so
and like, should that
Salesforce.
exist in Salesforce, or do they feel like going to Ironclad or AgileOps or whatever? And then, like, likewise, like, the HR team has like some information about termination clauses and like that type of stuff that they need to know. And like, should that live in a different system or just in the HCM system? And like, similarly, the finance team needs to know about renewal and revenue recognition and you know, again, termination provisions and price increase provisions and like payment terms, and like, should that live in a contract management system or should that live in the ERP? Like, I think either of those is possible, but I think it's entirely possible that the finance team stays using the ERP and the sales team stays using the CRM. And so I think if that plays out, you're going to have to see some way to embed contracts information into those systems easily. And some of that may come through integrations with contract management systems. Some of that may come through tools like ours, and I suspect there'll be others where you can just embed features more easily into a CRM or ERP or whatever.
And just to round out that question with Chris's view, we do have a question, by the way, which we will have time to get to. Before we get to that question, though, Chris, I just wanted to give you that opportunity to pull out your little mini crystal ball for the future.
No crystal ball, but of course, all of the above, plus this thought, unlocking the $1 trillion market direct to consumers. Who speaks to consumers all the time? Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and Google. And they're always looking for products and figuring out how to monetize. Monetization does not have to be a payment for legal service. So bold prediction, between now and 2025, one or all of those big four will start providing a direct-to-consumer information. Remember the old will kits you used to get in bookstores? Information, curated and supported either by a subscription fee or by ads on the site for gosh knows what. That would revolutionize what we call access to justice, which is really justice for the 80%.
That's a great prediction to make. We'll definitely keep a close eye on that one, Chris. Thank you. Just to jump into a question here we have from Brooke, what is the best method to get talent in the legal tech space? Is it hiring younger people who grew up in the digital world, or hiring experienced lawyers looking for a change? Anyone can take that question.
I don't know that I fully understand the question. Like, is the question is it legal technology companies? So there's a couple of ways to do it, and maybe I'll answer one way, and I saw Olga about to jump in there, and like different ways that I interpret the question are ways to get technology into, or people into legal tech companies. Like, how do you get into a legal tech company, or how can legal tech companies get people into them? Or the other way is, how do you get legal innovation legal market players like law firms or corporates? I don't know if there's
maybe it's how would you approach getting legal tech talent? Maybe as a founder of a legal tech company, where do you go to? Do you go to the former lawyers or outside that the legal ecosystem?
So Kira Systems, we're probably like, I think when we exited, we're about 180 people. Of that 180 people, probably 30 of us maybe had a legal background. And some of that was people who are in kind of like lawyer roles, right? Like they were legal knowledge engineering, or they were in-house legal or something like that. Then we had some people who were in adoption type roles, adoption encouragement roles. We found lawyers who could be pretty good in those types of roles. And then there's some people who are just in random roles like me, where, or my teammate Steve Babensky, where we were just in legal tech, but we could have been in some other industry, but we happen to sort of have more background in legal tech. So that's why we were doing that. But I think like at a tech company, like the other way to think about that means we also had like 150 people who had no legal tech background, right? Like they were just, and some of those people post Kira have gone on to stay in legal tech and gone to other companies, which is great. But a lot of the people you need in a tech company are like developers or finance people or HR people or product managers or marketing people or salespeople. Like salespeople are kind of interesting because a lot of them are specialized legal technology salespeople, but few of them have legal backgrounds. Some great ones do, but many don't have lawyer backgrounds, but have been selling legal for a long time.
I don't really know the direct answer to the question, but I can tell you that I get probably at least one or two people reaching out to me on LinkedIn every week, or Twitter, asking me how they can possibly do something in legal innovation. A lot of them are dissatisfied with the whole recession nation phenomenon. A lot of them are looking for firms that are doing, they would like either they're, law students, or they're interested in, some kind of hybrid role, and they're looking for kind of like-minded organizations one way or another, where they can kind of leverage all of those different aspects of their careers. And I think that, anything that's new and exciting and can provide folks with the feeling that, especially if they're lawyers, that they didn't go to law school in vain, to be totally honest. But there are different ways to do their to leverage their experiences in the business environment. I think there are a lot of disgruntled folks out there that just want to do something very different. And so I those are the folks asking me what I'm my advice is, and so I assume there's a lot of them out there.
I'm going to make a couple of observations. Observations one, talent and passion are equally distributed across population, whether it's lawyers or not lawyers, whether it's younger, whatever young means to you. I expect to live until 120, so up until 100, you're pretty young to me. I invite people to have really open mind. What I do look for, if they haven't done this before, is some passion or some mark that they are actually interested. And that comes in social media, that comes in writing, that comes in speaking, that comes in volunteering, advisory boards, you name it. Anything that could be qualified as test driving or dress rehearsal, I think are really, really positive signs. And a third observation, I tell everyone that I'm in gem collection business. I see gems who are passionate about law. They stand out. They're not hiding. When you find gems, they're so loud and clear, and it doesn't matter what their background is. You just can't stop thinking that your collection is incomplete. So I move through life looking for gems, and they're all around. There are a lot of people who want to see justice and law serving the right audience. And I invite people to look for that.
Indeed. And just in maybe the last minute or so, Wendy and or Chris, did you guys want to have a quick attempt at that question from your perspective?
I think getting people into legal tech, attracting talent, requires that you paint the picture of why it's important. One of my bosses used to say, if you want to teach someone to sail, then don't tell them how to build a boat. Inspire them with the loveliness of the open sea. And I think today more and more people want to make a difference. They want to feel that what they're doing is making a difference. And the more we can paint the difference for them and how what they're doing will paint the difference, the more likely we're going to get them into this part of law as opposed to something else or some other company, such as the ones I mentioned otherwise earlier.
Okay, great. Wendy, final say before we wrap.
I'll close that over the course of my career at this stage, it's all innovation now for the most part. And I work with people with such vastly different training and perspective than I have. It's been one of the most rewarding things about my career. So as you build your innovation team, it's looking for people who think differently than you do, who think differently than lawyers. We're taught there's one answer, and to try to find, one that it's a perfect answer. And there are folks who are taught to continue to ask the question why, which is something I think as lawyers we're a little taught to be afraid of. And so that's been something that's been incredibly rewarding to me personally, and then extraordinary for our team professionally.
Awesome. Great closing remarks. Really appreciate everyone's time on the panel. Wonderful discussion. And thank you again for your time. Over to you, Terry, to wrap up.
Thanks very much, David. And thank you, everyone. Fabulous discussion. Thanks, everyone, for attending. I'm going to also respond, if I may, to the last question and say, with a shameless plug, please come and hang with us in the Centre for Legal Innovation, because we like to kind of, play with you and talk with you about all of this stuff as well. So do that. We would love to see you. And if you would like to know more about our work, but the work of everyone really on this panel, and find them and connect with them. I know that you can do that through multiple social media platforms. So do feel free to connect with them. I know they're open to that. And as they've already indicated, extremely generous with their time as they have been today. So we really, really appreciate that. Our next stop in this journey is in Asia, and that will be on the 31st of August. So if you're following this series, we'll see you then. If you've just been to this one, you've been to a fabulous one. Thank you very much indeed, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Terry.